Most founders under a million think branding is what makes a business grow. Better logo, better website, better brand voice. They believe that if the business looks premium, that sales will follow. But that's not how this works because branding does not create demand. It amplifies demand that already exists within the business. And if the underlying business isn't working, then branding will not fix it. It just makes the problem harder to see. And that is because most founders believe the same thing, usually when they're starting out, and again, usually when they're under a million. They think if the logo looks good enough, if the website feels premium enough, if the messaging sounds sophisticated enough, that branding will solve their sales problem, that customers will buy. So they spend a lot of time or a lot of money trying to do the same thing over and over again. They tweak the website design, they refine the colors, they rewrite the brand story, and they assume that the perception will turn into revenue. But branding does not work that way. There is a simple formula for when branding matters in a business, how it actually affects it, and when you're too early in the process of your business for it to even matter. So, branding at the end of the day is not something that you declare. In fact, branding is something that more often than not you're curating at the end of the day. How it actually works is that when you have a good product or service, customers will buy it. They will talk to each other about your things and the offerings that you have. A reputation begins to form within their minds, and that reputation is what is actually the brand. Branding, again, it's not something you declare, it's something that customers conclude. Branding is essentially the perception that forms after many real experiences with your business. The product quality, the customer outcomes, the word of mouth, the reviews, the consistency, all these little micro experiences stack up, and over time, those experiences form the reputation. That reputation is the brand. Now, typically when a founder thinks about branding, one of the most common examples is what I like to call the Apple illusion. It's one of the biggest brands in the world. It's one of the most valuable ones. And so what ends up happening is they zoom out and they look at their mantra or their ethos, if you will, what they stand for, their clean design, minimal messaging, premium positioning. And they assume that Apple built their growth through branding, but it's actually backwards. Apple didn't start with a brand. They actually started extremely niche in a garage, hanging out with a bunch of other nerdy guys building these scrap together products for scrap together engineers and developers and computer guys who like this type of thing. They built products people loved, and those in turn created the experiences that people trust, and the trust created the reputation. So, put it bluntly, usually a business owner will think, if we just copy them, or if I copy X big brand, Nike, Louis Vuitton, if I copy this huge luxury brand, I can be just like them. And if I copy them, we'll grow, right? But it doesn't work that way. So what happens is usually that business owner will again fall into the same trap time and time again. They redesign the logo and the website. They make their brand voice clever instead of clear. They try and fake a luxury brand, but they miss the reason that Apple can do that. If we go back to what I was talking about earlier, it's a pretty simple progressive timeline. Founded in 1976, there's the prototype hastily put together by Steve Wozniak, talking to their products and developing things for a very particular segment of people who value this type of thing. Transitioning into the Macintosh, going into the iPod, the iPhone, and beyond. Starts with the products. Those deliver the value builds the reputation builds a brand. And if it's not Apple in your world, go look at any other legacy brand. When they first start, there's usually some degree of innovation, true differentiation, a moat that actually makes them different. Until you get to that point, you don't have a brand. And what people always end up trying to do when they copy this, and why this is so important if you want to visually look at it, is what really formulates a brand? What really is the brand at the end of the day is most of the time what people say about you when behind closed doors, what the microcosm of each individual customer who's actually interacted with your stuff. So when people try and do that incorrectly over here, they will hold up this big trophy and say, "Oh, we're premium, we're luxury, we're local, we're innovative." They're trying to force perception. They decide they want the business to feel premium or feel a certain way, innovative, trusted. So they write these words everywhere, but that's just a claim. Real branding doesn't just come from one message. It doesn't come from better logos, flashier fonts, cooler looking websites. It comes from hundreds of very small experiences. And it's always the boring stuff that starts off the brand correctly. It is the product quality, or more importantly, the results of that product or service. But again, the product or service quality or results, the reviews, the consistency, the word of mouth, the repeat buyers. People are feeling like they're belonging to something, part of a community. You can't develop this by forcing it on them. It comes naturally as a byproduct of actually delivering on what you say it is. It's the same thing as if you saw somebody who was, rags to riches. They're wearing just crummy looking shirt, crummy looking pants, but they're a multimillionaire and they're going to give you sage business advice. Or you have this guy who comes in and he's trying to sell you some sort of course for $100,000 that's going to tell you how to make crypto online, but he's wearing a fancy suit. It is vapid. It's hollow. It is not real. These experiences that you create as a byproduct of your product or service connect together, and eventually people form an opinion about your business, and that opinion becomes the brand. You can't force the brand. You can only earn one. That is why it's so important. You want to have depth. You want to have character. You want to be honest and real with your stuff. You want to deliver real value to real people over a real period of time. And at the end, you will have a brand that inherently forms. So the real question then is, well, if that's the case, why does everybody try and form a brand? Why is everybody so obsessed with building a brand? The truth is, because when you look at successful companies, it looks like branding almost always came first. And I'm going to move this just a little bit down. That's not the case. When you look at, again, these luxury brands, these tech companies, massive consumer brands, their branding is everywhere. Their identity is clear. Their design is beautiful, or it feels aligned, or it feels on point aesthetically. So founders assume the brand is what makes them successful. But what you're actually seeing is the result of success over a very long period of time. Not the case when you actually try and force it. It's not the cause. It wasn't the branding that made them successful. Again, it was all the boring stuff. So at the end of the day, branding is usually, unfortunately, the lowest barrier to entry, if you will. It's because branding feels productive. If we want to get, if we want to get into the psychology of it, it's because branding, fixing the logo, doing aesthetics, tweaking the website, picking your voice, all of this stuff, it feels productive. It's a high dopamine activity. You can see it, and it creates fuzzy results in your mind. If I tweak the website and then I magically get a sale next week, I'm going to say to myself, wow, that was great. I'm so glad I focused on that thing. But they usually don't change the underlying economics of the business. And this is really important if you are just starting out, and most importantly, if you are under 1 million, because your real problems, your conversion, your pricing, your customer value, your retention, these things actually determine whether the business even grows. But they are much less glamorous to actually work on, because you have to have objectivity. You have to be objective and seriously do some soul searching as to, do the economics of my business work? Is my product or service good enough? Does it make sense? Hard-hitting questions, but they have a true measurable impact. You can measure when one tweak that you've made to your close rate affects your total revenue, when your conversion rate, when your pricing, when your offer and retention, your LTV, when all of these things affect your revenue. So if branding isn't the Hail Mary that everybody thinks it is, what actually drives growth? Well, real growth, to be plain and simple, is a lot more boring than what people think it actually is. I'm going to move myself up here so you can actually read that. It is, again, just to reiterate, conversion. How many of the people are buying? Pricing. Is my pricing competitive? And does it provide enough value relative to how much I'm asking? Your offer. Is your offer good enough for people to understand the value and say yes? Your retention. How many people stay and how long they stay? And the lifetime value. How often they keep buying more and more new things. Those are really the mechanics. If you want to break it down into a very simple system, traffic, conversion, customer value, repeat purchases. Those four mechanics determine revenue, and that's it. Revenue at the end of the day is a formula. Revenue equals your traffic, how many people see it, times conversion, how many people buy it, times value, how much they spend, times the frequency, how often they spend. Now, none of those are solved by a new logo. None of those are solved by trying to adjust the website. None of those are solved by changing the color. It's going to be solved by understanding that branding is a future multiplier. That's why this is often so hard for many business owners, especially in the early stages, to grasp. If you think about it and you pull out your calculator, branding is a future multiplier, meaning at this point, if you have zero value, if you have zero equity, if you have zero proof of delivering results over a period of time, 0 times your multiplier equals 0. That is often the hardest part for people to grasp. And let me put this into the real problem, because you're probably asking, okay, well, what should I be doing at this point then if not doing branding? Because let's get honest for ourselves for a second. If branding were to solve this, then all you would need to do is to go to Fiverr or go to 99 Designs or find a local graphic designer, make your stuff look pretty, and everybody would be a millionaire. That is not the case, because the real problem is you have no next thing to sell. You only have one thing usually to sell. You have low sales or low awareness, or sometimes both. You have no repeat buyers or referrals, and you have no business structure. That is the real problem. Most businesses under $1 million aren't stuck because they need better branding. They're stuck because their entire mechanics are broken. Not enough people seeing the offer. Most people who see it don't buy. Maybe customers buy once and they never come back. Every business has a constraint, and one bottleneck will limit your entire growth. And if you don't find it, you end up optimizing for the wrong thing. And branding essentially becomes a very expensive distraction. So, the real order of things, if you're under $1 million at this point, if you're under $1 million, the order actually matters. First, you define the niche, then you build an offer for those people who actually want that thing, then you make sure the offer converts, then you increase customer value and repeat purchases. Only then does it make sense to push traffic and run ads and create content so that people will actually see your stuff, because the economics and all of the numbers are adding up. Most business founders, most owners, operators, startups, they actually reverse this process. They say, I just need traffic. I just need to run ads. I just need more eyeballs on my stuff. And then when the business struggles, they assume that the brand needs work, when really it's the boring stuff. It's one of these things inside the list over here. You don't even need to guess. You just need to find that constraint. So I'm also going to zoom back out here. When does branding actually matter? Because it does matter at some point. I'm not going to pretend and sit here for a second that it's not going to be valuable. But the thing is, even as somebody who started as a creative professional over a decade ago, I realized that under $1 million, it's usually premature. Branding starts to matter when the business mechanics already work, when customers are buying consistently, when trust already exists, when people are inherently coming back without you having to convince them. At that point, branding becomes a multiplier. Because if you are at this stage and you're fixated on brand redesign, new logo, fancy site, trying to be clever, these brand voice beliefs, everything inside of this this checklist over here that you're fixated on, it's not going to do anything. It's again an expensive distraction. But there is a tangible outcome for the business over here. Pardon me, my camera is mirrored. And at that point, branding does become a true multiplier. Branding will lower your CAC, meaning it costs you less to acquire people. It increases trust within the organization or the business or the company, because people look at it and say, okay, this seems like a reputable brand. This seems like something that's trustworthy. It strengthens retention, meaning that your loyalty, your LTV, actually keeps people buying more stuff over a longer period of time. And it strengthens retention. You actually get referrals. It compounds. People want to want to talk about your stuff. You get more customers by getting customers to recommend you without you having to ask at that point. People want to talk about your stuff. That's usually above the $1 million mark. Now, if you want to get really specific at this point, and we'll get to this in just a second because I just want to recap exactly what we talked about so it's crystal clear. You have a working business, you multiply that with a brand, you have a bigger business. You have a broken business, you multiply that by a brand, you literally just have the same broken business and you have less money. It's as simple as that. But realistically, brand multiplies the working business, but brand also multiplies a broken business too. Again, if your economics work, brand makes them stronger. If your economics don't work, brand just kind of hides the problem for a longer period of time, and either way it becomes a multiplier. It's not a mechanic. So I want you to ask yourself a few simple questions at this stage that will help you understand, should I be focusing on branding, to make it just a lot easier for you to decide where you should be at right now. So let's think about this. Ask yourself a few simple questions. Do customers buy easily when they see your offer? Yes? No? Do they come back again? Do they recommend you without you having to ask them? Are your margins healthy? If the answer to all of these is yes, branding will help you scale. It's not really a question. It's just at that point, I have something that people want. They like it. They are feeling an allegiance to my business, and they feel like they're part of the tribe, part of the community. They like what they see and they want to praise it without me having to force it upon them. They have an idea of what it is in their head. And if the answer is no, then branding is just a distraction. And you can just basically say to yourself that it's probably going to waste a lot of time and a lot of money because you're avoiding the real questions. Now, at this point, I will give you two choices because this will help you really understand what you need to do next. You have two options. You can either keep redesigning the website, tweaking the brand voice, and hoping that your perception that you're trying to mold fixes the business. Or you can find the real constraint in your business in just 30 seconds. The one bottleneck actually limiting growth. Fix that fast because when the mechanics work, everything else becomes easier, including the brand. If you want to do that, all you have to do is click on the link in the description or the pinned comment. Again, 30 seconds free. Do it on your own on whatever device you're watching this on. Until then, I hope this video was valuable. Make sure you do subscribe. I put out a video like this every single week, and I hope this was, again, eye-opening for you. I want you to get a mindset shift to understand that, yes, I do want you to win, but you should be winning by focusing on the real problems in the business, not expensive distractions, not shiny object syndrome. And that's all I have for you today. Until then, I'll see you next time.